Thank you, guys. I'm going to let every service know I'm bragging about Aaron and Damien, who's playing bass, and Josh and Dan and Sam. They recently were awarded, let me get the name of the magazine right, by Marquee Magazine as one of the top Colorado albums of the year. So now the songs he plays in bars, he doesn't play here, so you'll have to go listen to that album at the different places, all right? But it's really neat to have such great musicians, and we're really proud of them. It's a great honor. Top 20 Colorado albums of the year. We're proud of them. So Aaron did a good job introducing the new series where we're teaching through the book of Matthew, but we're looking at Matthew through these themes of our Father, our King. And I love the Hebrew prayer, to cry out to God, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. It's such a helpful way in learning to relate to God. One reason we think it's helpful is we often run into people, and even I find myself just thinking this way at times, we just think of God as one of those two things. And so maybe you're really comfortable thinking of God as king and ruler, and you think of his authority and his power, and even maybe you're not afraid of him, but sometimes that can be the result of just thinking of him as king. But you just love the idea that he's in control, and that's a good thing. And then there are others, and often it's people in the same family or a couple. And the other thinks of God more as a loving father, that he's close, that he's intimate, that he's there to support us, that he's drawing us closer and closer to him, and that we get to sense his love. That's also a beautiful thing. The problem comes when we only see God in one of those ways, because God is both king and father, isn't he? He's both building a kingdom and a family at the same time. Both are true. And so during this series, as we go through Matthew, 28 chapters, it's a long book. We're not going to spend 28 weeks on it, but we're going to pull out different themes. And what we want to do is this simple goal of try to learn to relate to God more as a father and also as a king. And so to do that, there will be some times where we're very much humbled by the fact that he's a king and that he's in control, but we'll also be affirmed because that's what good, loving fathers and mothers do to their children. They affirm them and encourage them. And so that's the series. Today, we're kicking it off, and we're starting the story of Jesus as Matthew recorded it with some of the Christmas stories. And what you're going to see today is we're going to start with the same theme that Matthew started with about Jesus, and it's the theme of family. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, you get the beginning of Jesus' family tree. Okay, it's kind of painful to read, so you can read it, but it's really about his family tree, and there is meaning behind it. Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, it starts off with a relationship, a family, a marriage between Mary and Joseph. And this is what I want you to think of. We just went through the Advent reading. We picture the nativity. That's often what we think of when we think of the setting in which Jesus was placed into this world. It was all on purpose. It was deliberate, planned, just as the prophets of old had spoken and said that it would happen. Jesus is placed into this world, but we often just think that he's placed in that stable, no room for an inn. The animals were around, the lowly shepherds. But I want you to think of this. Jesus was placed into a family, a marriage. He was given to a young, virtuous Jewish woman named Miriam, or Mary, and he was given to a young, virtuous Jewish man named Joseph. God trusted each of them to care for his son, their son, and he placed them in the midst of this family so that Jesus might thrive. See, Jesus needed this setting so that he could mature and grow and live out his purpose. So what I want to do today is I want to look at the virtue of Mary. I want to look at the virtue of Joseph. I think there's a challenge for all of us there. And then I want to talk about the meaning of marriage, because I don't want to just look past the fact that Jesus was placed into a family and into a marriage, because there is power behind marriage today just as there was back then. And so if you have your Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 through 25. This is where we're going to read the story. Luke has a parallel passage that gives you more details about Mary. If you'd like to read that, you can pick that up. But this is Matthew's account. Let me say this before we read. I don't want us thinking of Christmas in a novel way, a romantic, a beautiful way, because it wasn't like that. We look at the nativity, everything's perfect. I remember we had these nativity scenes in my home growing up, and my mom said that we couldn't touch them because they were more expensive than we were as kids, and so you couldn't play with them. It was like the finest art we had in the house. But that's not what it was like. I mean, if you were to take the plot line of what happened with Mary and Joseph and the birth of Jesus and put it into a movie today, it'd be a rated R movie. It'd be a Netflix series that you wouldn't let your little kids watch, okay? You have adultery, betrayal, divorce, murder, hate. You have a bunch of just issues that actually would make for a really good series and movie, things that we see played out today: an unplanned pregnancy, relational uncertainty, single mothers, social shame, judgment. They're political refugees. A lot of people miss that. They have to flee to Egypt. There's even an adoption in this story. All of these things are a part of this. So this is a rated R, gritty story, okay? And for Mary and Joseph, it almost was like a nightmare for the beginning, okay? So verse 18. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be with a child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man, and I think what you see behind me is it says he was faithful to the law. Other versions say he was a just man. He did not want to expose her to public disgrace. He had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, Yeshua, because he will save his people from their sins. All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet Isaiah. The virgin will be with a child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and he took Mary home as his wife, but he had no union, or he did not consummate the marriage until she had given birth to a son, and he gave him, the son, the name Jesus. Matthew's account. So let's look at Mary to start. Let me first say this. Mary is an incredible example to all of us of what it looks like to walk with God. She is a virtuous woman. So she is an example to women of what feminine virtue looks like. She's also a young woman, probably a teenager. And we love that we have a lot of young adults in our church. We love it. But Mary it's like an extra example for you today. She lives out her feminine virtue. One of the things that we find really important to talk about today because of things that are taking place in our culture is the importance of gender. God created, right? He made us. He made us as we are with all of our gifts and passions and even our struggles. But God also made us with our gender. He chose it. And it wasn't on accident, but your gender means something to God. And it is meant to be a gift or a grace that's given to the world. And so today we kind of downplay it, or we act like it's bad to be feminine or it's bad to be masculine. But usually when we're rejecting it, we're rejecting certain notions of it, and we don't understand what the scriptures actually say about what it means to be feminine and masculine as God is, because God is both. It's really important for us to explain it. And so to be feminine is just these qualities of being able to receive and nourish and create home, to have the courage to receive. And to be masculine means to remember God, to be willing and have the courage to make movement and to lead to impact. That's what we see in Genesis 1 of what it means to be masculine and feminine. And it doesn't matter what kind of things that you like to do, whatever it is that you like to do, or the habits that you have, or the practices that you have, or the skills that you have, God chose your gender and it means something. Now, I know, even though I love speaking about gender and get asked to do it quite a bit nowadays, that I'm a pastor in Boulder. And so as soon as you say gender, it's like, oh, no. My wife gets nervous every time. Who's going to send you emails? But let me tell you what it's not about. I don't have a ton of time to explain gender here. We've done it in other places. Just want to make the point that it's important that Mary is seen as a feminine woman. But let me say this. I'm not talking about old, superficial cultural stereotypes that are left over from old generations. That's not what we're trying to connect to. We have to stop defining masculinity and femininity in terms of our habits like dresses, makeup, and shopping, or alcohol, trucks, and sports. Okay? That is less. That is small. And God has big plans for us as he made us men and women. Now, Mary is a godly woman. And she's actually in a very joyful time in her life. And so verse 18, where the story picks up, this is one of the best times in her life. After all, she's getting married. The man that she's fallen in love with has promised to her. They're betrothed. They're actually getting married. Betrothal was actually a legal relationship. That's why it required a divorce. It's somewhere between our modern version of engagement and marriage. And so she's busy. Her and her family are planning the marriage, the wedding, and they've gone through all the family meetings, and all the hard work is done, and she's really excited. And Mary was probably thinking, this is kind of how I hoped my life would turn out. I'm marrying a good man. And so she's excited. And then, as is usually the case, as soon as we think things are going just as planned, something interrupts that, doesn't it? So it's life, and sometimes it's God. And we're not eager to thank him for interrupting our plans. But this is exactly what happens to her. She's visited by an angel. She's told that she's going to be overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit in her womb, that God would create inside of her, and that the result would be a son. And Mary does what a normal person would do. And I like that it's in there. I like that we just don't breeze by this and think, oh, she just had an easy time. But Mary wasn't going to have an easy time with this. We're told that she was afraid and that she asked questions, which means she was doubting. She was struggling. And it's not bad to be afraid, and it's not bad to doubt, but what can happen is when our fear and our doubts stop us, that's where it becomes something that's not helpful. So Mary has doubts, and she has fear, and she's struggling. But then we're told in Luke, this is Luke's version, chapter 1, verse 38, she says this, I am a servant of the Lord. He's my king. Let it be according to his word. One of the things we love about Jesus is later on in his life when he was in the garden, remember, he asked God for another way, but he says at the end of that prayer, not my way, but your way. Where do you think Jesus learned that? His mom. I'm a servant of the Lord, let it be according to your word. It's incredible that she could say yes to this. Mary is free to obey, but this obedience and this faith and this courage, and they all kind of go in the same family of virtues, is not a new thing for this young lady. She's probably made many choices of courageous choices and faithful choices through the years. You don't just get to this place in a moment. She's been saying yes to God in the smaller way so she can say yes to God now in this big way. Her faith in response to God is not new. She's been trusting him for a very long time. And I think that's why it says in Luke chapter 1, verse 28, that we're told that she was highly favored by God. Because she has virtue, quality that shows up everywhere, and she's young. You're never ready for this type of thing. You're never ready to be a spouse, to be a parent. You're never ready to let your son die. You're never ready to go through what she was about to go through and the shame that she would experience. She wasn't ready for that. But she could trust God. She's an incredible example of a beautiful young lady. She's lived a life of purity, hard work, humility, and courage. And she would continue to live a life of faith and fidelity and service. She's not just concerned about her external beauty, but she's more concerned about her inner beauty, and she cares about the heart. And I think that's part of the key to Mary's virtue, her strength, is that she had long ago given her heart to God. Instead of anyone else, before anyone else, she had given her heart to God, and I think this is really important for women to do. You give your heart to him, and he will free your heart, and he will fill it. The world might let you down, but he will give you what you need, and she had done this. And so she's willing to walk this difficult road. She's also wise, even though she's young. Today, we are really quick to say of young people, when we make bad choices, I'll put myself in that category, oh, they're young, they don't know yet. Wisdom is about learning from other people. I mean, we learn a couple ways, right? We learn from our own consequences, or we learn from wisdom, the truth that's passed down through others. But she's wise. She's also not waiting to get her life together when she gets older. She's not wasting her 20s on herself. She's ready to move along, to be a servant, to love, to care, to make attachments. She has the courage to do those things. And it would not be easy. I mean, she's going to have to face the same things we do as young people. And she's going to say things like, this isn't fair, I wasn't ready for it, I don't know what to do. I mean, think about just the layers of problems she has, the relational problems she has with Joseph. How is she going to explain this? What if he doesn't believe her? What if she's alone? I mean, that's a real option here. Joseph might say, hey, he's a good man. He's going to leave her alone. He just wants her to move on with her life and his life. And she's thinking, who will ever take me? She has a hard-to-explain pregnancy. Might I be alone, a single mom, struggling by myself? She has the cultural challenges. Think of the judgment, the shame. We're told later on in one of the Gospels that this kind of reputation of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph would follow them. Jesus is actually mocked. In one place, they say, you don't even know who your dad is. So it's not like this thing was kept secret and it didn't go with them. This was something the family had to deal with their whole life. The worry about providing for her family. We'll see here in a moment the worry about the safety of her son. Things are bad. She's 9 months pregnant, on a donkey, on a dusty road. She goes into labor. There's no place to go. And the only person there to help her is her young, clueless fiance. All right? I mean, that sounds like a nightmare. Poor Mary. And I've been in the delivery room 4 times. It's also a nightmare for Joseph. He did not want this job. It's just tough. The whole thing just keeps getting worse and worse. And then you have this evil king that has this power in Israel. He's a puppet king. You're going to hear about him next week, Herod. And Herod comes up with this evil plan because he's afraid that Jesus might actually be the king of the Jews, the real Messiah. And he orders the unthinkable, the murder of every little boy 2 years old and younger. Can you imagine that happening? Which it did. So imagine bringing a child into that setting. It was impossible. But she said yes to God. She's amazing. She's a hero. She's an example for all of us, but especially for women. Mary, Ruth, Deborah, there's a number of women in the scriptures. Those are the ladies we need to hold up and say, let's be like them. The inner beauty exceeds the outer beauty. And then there's Joseph. Joseph, by the way, was also a young man, probably just a few years older. We're not told a lot about him, but we're told just enough. We're told that he's a good man, that he was faithful to the law, or a righteous man. And so I love how some translations say he was a just man or a righteous man. I love that because it's going with this theme that occurs throughout the scriptures, this Jewish theme of doing righteous acts. So something we teach here at Cornerstone is tzedakah or tzedakah. And it means to do good. It means to put good into the world, to bring about healing, to not just worry about not doing bad things and keeping to yourself, but it's actually being a light that lights other people's world. Okay, so it's doing good, and those things are different. And those people that did righteous acts are often referred to as tzedeks. It's a great title to have. It's a privilege to have it. Boaz was a tzedek. Jesus was a tzedek, but so was Joseph because he did good. And Joseph would live out his masculine strength by remembering God, which is part of masculinity, moving towards others relationally, and leading to life-giving impact. That's what it means to be masculine, and Joseph would do this. He's a good man. He's the opposite of a selfish man, although he would have to deal with that just like every man does. He serves, he forgives, he's kind, he's concerned about the welfare of others. He's also the opposite of a passive man. He acts, he pursues, he's faithful, he keeps his promise, he takes responsibility for himself, and he takes responsibility for others. And he's going to serve his little world with his masculine strength, his wife, his family, his son. But before this nightmare occurs, you could say, he's also in a very exciting time in his life. He's marrying his best friend. I mean, he's won Mary over. He's convinced her family that he's trustworthy, and this wedding is happening. He's excited. And then he hears the worst possible thing you could hear if you're a man in that moment. She's cheated. People describe that pain as worse than death, being betrayed that way. Devastating. I can think of Joseph, the strong man, crying himself to sleep. I don't know how many nights it was before the angel came, but I can just see him in his sadness, his despair. But even in the midst of his pain, he doesn't want to get even. He's willing to forgive, and he's still a good man. He doesn't want to ruin Mary's life. He just wants to move on. I mean, he's amazing. What do we usually do with our pain? We get angry, we get even. He's the opposite. He doesn't want to hurt her. He doesn't want to hate her. The angel comes to him and says, Joseph, the story is true. As crazy as it sounds, it's true. And Joseph gets the message, and he wakes up, and he doesn't obey this is what a lot of times we think. He obeys the angel. He doesn't obey the angel. He obeys God. The angel had the message. There's a number of ways that God can communicate to us, right? Through other people, the scriptures, prayer, an angel, a dream. God can communicate to us in different ways. What matters, though, is not that there was an angel that was sent. What matters is that Joseph heard the message and said yes. How could he do this? Well, I think Joseph's done something that every man should do. He has bowed his heart to God. Said, all right, life is not about me, it's about you. I give you my ego, I give you my ambition. I'm willing to do what it is you've asked. And how could he do that? Because God is his king, but he's also his father. He would need all of that. He would need the power of God, and he'd need the love of God in his life. And Joseph is a good man. He's a masculine man. I want to say a little bit about masculinity because we're in this tough place right now in our culture where there is a lot of confusion about what it means to actually be a man. Recently read a Time magazine article the article was called How Young Men Are Facing a Masculinity Crisis. And the crisis is defined by no one knows what to do with men. No one knows what to call men to. And it's not enough just to say to our guys, you need to be nice little boys. It's not enough. And so we have this huge problem, and we see it in the news all the time. This spring, there will be an article that comes out in the Daily Camera that will summarize a study that comes out of CU every year about the number of sex assaults that are taking place on the CU campus. Last year, 28% of females at the University of Colorado had been sexually assaulted in some way, almost all of them by men or the boys there. What about the news right now? Every other day, some powerful media mogul, coach, athlete, celebrity is exposed for their harassment, their abuse, even rape towards women. I mean, I'm so glad it's being exposed. I'm so glad that women have the courage. But what it's showing us is that we have a serious problem. What do we do with these guys? We have a reason to be worried. Philip Zimbardo wrote a book a few years ago that I've mentioned several times because I'm just passionate about this subject. It's called Man Disconnected. If you have a son, I think it's a must read. It's not a Christian book, but he describes what's happening to guys. And he describes just, some cause and effect, but he spends more time just saying, this is actually what's happening. I don't want to put judgment on it, but guys are struggling socially, so relationally, they're struggling educationally, vocationally, and I would add spiritually. At every level, in ways that they can measure, men are having a hard time. And this is connected, not just because of this, but it's connected to pornography and this epidemic. It's everywhere. Did you know that the average age a boy first sees pornography is 10? That's the average first exposure. I got a 10-year-old. He's in 5th grade. He's in elementary school. The largest growing industry in our country is the sex industry. And they spend a lot of money marketing and getting to our little boys with an addictive drug. What we know of pornography, it acts in the mind like an addictive drug does. They do not have the resources in them to deal with it. See, in a sense, we have this thing happening. We have these boys who are victims. But if we don't interrupt the cycle, they become a part of the problem. We become part of the problem. Speak for myself. That's why, like this men's breakfast where we're talking about sexual brokenness and health, a lot of guys are like, why would I come to that? Because we need to. Not because it's comfortable or fun or exciting, but we need to. And one thing I'm committed to as a pastor here is making sure that this church is a safe place where we can all deal with all of our shadow. But this is something that's a part of every family and every relationship, and I believe it's a struggle for every guy. And this needs to be a place where we can talk about things without judgment, but also with the encouragement to move along because healing is possible. Here's what I worry about, what I read just about masculinity in our culture. There's a CNN thing last week about how we need to reject masculinity, but really they just don't understand what it is. It's not enough to just say something is bad. You have to say something is bad and then show something that's good to replace it, okay? So you don't change culture by just condemning it. You change culture by creating new and better culture. It's always the case. This is what I'm worried about. We are not marking the way. We are not painting a picture. We're not giving a vision of what a man should be like. There's so much confusion. And a church, I believe, should be one of the places that people can come and say, all right, here's what it looks like to be a man like Jesus, like Joseph. A man that God created with masculine strength. The men's ministry in the spring is going to spend 6 or 8 weeks defining real masculinity. We'd love all the guys to be there. And we're committed to these things. We believe in shaping our culture. We believe in keeping us healthy, and we can't do it unless we face these things that are dark. I think if Joseph were alive today, he would have to deal with the same things men deal with, but I think because he's a just and a good man, a humble man, I think he would be walking that difficult road of change and transformation. So Joseph is faithful, and he takes Mary as his wife and Jesus as his son, and he loves them. In a sense, Jesus is like his adopted son. A lot of people ask, at least when we're in these conversations about men and masculinity, we often say things like, Jesus is the most masculine man that ever lived. That's why we love him. So where did Jesus learn to be a man? Well, he learned to be a man where every guy learns to be a man, and that's from another man. Okay? You're initiated into manhood by another guy all along the way. And we're meant to be initiated into manhood by our dads. Now, that's not always the case. That's why God gives us spiritual fathers to step in and help move us along. But Jesus learned to be a man from his dad. 30 years working with him as a carpenter. We don't know how long Joseph lived, so maybe it wasn't 30 years. He learned the trade, but he learned what it means to follow God as a male. From his dad. Who did Jesus want to be like? Like his dad. What did Jesus rely on when things were tough and he was uncertain? He'd rely on the wisdom of his dad, also his mother. I'm the dad of 4 boys, and the qualities Joseph has, I hope my boys have. That's what we're working towards in our family. So Joseph is this incredible guy that says yes to this impossible task. How could he do it? He bowed his heart to God, and God was both his father and his king. And he also did what the Lord had commanded. Not my way, God, but your way. God had moved in his life. Amazing, amazing. Her virtue, his virtue, they're incredible. They're examples to all of us, specific examples of what it means to be a woman that follows after God, a man that follows after God, young adult. God trusted them. Think of that. He trusted them. For those of you that are a parent, can you imagine giving your child to someone else to take care of? People have to do this when they give their babies up for adoption. But can you imagine doing that? That's what God did. And he chose a young woman and a young man who had very little, had proven very little, but what was on the inside is what matters. Their virtue, their faith, their quality, how God had worked in their lives, their humility, those are the things that count. That's what God can use. So God uses them. God also used, so let's move on to the idea of marriage. God also used their relationship, their marriage. A lot of times we just think that marriage is meant to be, the purpose of marriage is to make us happy, that we might get what we want out of this relationship, that meets our needs, even our physical needs. That's why most people get married. I'm excited, they make me happy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but marriage is so much bigger than that. And so that's one reason you get married is because God tells you to, all right? Because it's a big task. It takes a man to be married. It takes a woman to be married. And so we get married, though, for a bigger reason than just our own personal joy and fulfillment. Marriage is meant to paint a picture. There is a meaning behind marriage. And this is what I want to say. Even if you're not married, we know that 9 out of 10 people would like to be married someday or have been, or people are married now. But marriage still is the foundation of culture, and everyone needs to value it in a similar way, okay? It's really important because it's the foundation of culture. Marriage still is the primary way in which people thrive. So if you go back to the studies that really started around the 1970s when marriage actually began to fall apart and be undervalued in our culture, divorces went up, you have these studies that show that marriage strongly boosts every important measure of well-being for children, women, and men. Pick any measure you can imagine. Overall physical and mental health, income, savings, employment, educational success, general life contentment, happiness, sexual satisfaction, even recovery from serious illness, health, diet, and exercise, all of those things, at every level, marriage helps those things. Now, it doesn't mean that every marriage does. It doesn't mean that a person that's not married can't experience health in these areas. But what it shows is what God designed actually is good for us. That's what it shows. If God designed it and said it's good for us, there should be some proof of that. So that's only my point here. It's not to make anyone feel bad that's not married. Maybe you've struggled with marriage. Maybe you've been divorced, okay? It's not meant to put any shame on that. I just want us to value marriage, okay? God valued it enough that he placed his son within one so that he might thrive, grow, mature, to get what he needed. He needed both his mother's strength and his father's strength. So the meaning of marriage. Marriage is meant to tell a story. Every marriage tells a story. Some marriages tell the story of selfishness, unforgiveness, bitterness. Some marriages tell the story of, man, just get yours. Let's have a lot of fun. To do what we want to do. Some marriages tell those stories. But then there are other marriages where faithfulness and service and sacrifice and vision help mark what it means to be married in that relationship. And that relationship tells a different story. This is what Paul tells us about marriage in the book of Ephesians. He says, when a husband acts masculine, when he loves and serves his wife, when he gives up, he's even willing to give up his life for his wife, and when the wife also serves and loves her husband in a humble way. When the two of them submit to one another to create oneness, guess what happens? You don't just have what you need to have a thriving, wonderful, beautiful marriage. You actually give the world, those close enough to watch, a picture of the greatest relationship that exists. Paul said it's a mega mystery. Marriage is meant to tell the story of Jesus loving you and you and you and everyone else out there. And if you have kids, part of our job in the way that we love our spouse is we are giving them the framework to understand a God that loves us. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know it does. Paul called it a mystery, which means there's some things we just don't get, but we see the results. Some of you are married to people who aren't walking with God. That was the story in my family. My mom loved Jesus, my dad didn't. Your faithfulness to your spouse, your humility towards them, loving them, your kids will draw from that. They'll draw from it. Your relationship is meant to fill in the questions to help them understand. And it's a gift that you can give them. So think of Mary and Joseph. They're literally giving the world the real picture of God loving us, right? Jesus, Yeshua. Incredible story. We can't move too quickly as we start to think about Jesus being both God, our Father, and King without saying that he was just like us. He needed to be placed into the care of loving adults, caring adults, a man and a woman to love him, and he was placed in a marriage, and it's not insignificant that he turned out the way he did. Now, this brings up the question, what do we do with the fact that there are families that are broken or haven't turned out the way that people would like? The church is meant to fill in the gaps of family. Do you know that? We're meant to shoulder together the responsibility of loving one another, caring for one another, helping people feel safe, raising kids. We're meant to do that together. This is the best place to work through the struggle if you're in one. This is the best place if you've already moved through the struggle and now you're just kind of on your own. This is the best place to be because you're meant to get the support that you need. There are a lot of spiritual mothers and fathers in this room. Family still works. And it needs our best effort. And it needs celebrated. All right, worship team, you guys can come out. I need to close. Brian's been on quite a soapbox today, talking about gender and marriage. But I'm ready to get down and go watch the Broncos lose. So that will really bring me down to earth. But I want to close with this. There are a lot of things to take from a message like this that can be a challenge to you, and we want it to be a challenge. Mary's virtue, Joseph's virtue, feminine virtue, masculine virtue, marriage. Okay, there's a lot of things to take. We change, though, the same way that everyone else does, and that is by being dependent on God. We can't just say, I'm going to do this. And that's part of the message of Christmas, that no matter what it is that you are facing, you can deal with what's in front of you. You can actually make it through because God will resource us in the way that we need. And how does he do that? He promises us, he's faithful to us, and he gives us his presence. Right? Isn't that the message of Christmas? He kept his promise, and God got very, very close. So here's what's beautiful. Christmas reminds us that God doesn't intervene in our lives from a distance, but he gets very close, and he walks with us, and he shares the burden. And he breathes life into us. The Holy Spirit empowers us. And so whatever it is that you're saying, like, I would like to be a little different in this area, it starts by going to him saying, I need some help. And that's what he loves to do, because he is a wise king and he is a loving father. So whatever it is that you're facing or thinking about, it's really simple. You go to him. You rely on him and you let him walk you down that road, that next stage of your journey. So let's bow our heads. I'm going to give us just a chance to reflect for a moment. And I want to ask you, what would it look like for you right now to trust him with something that he's put in front of you, something that he said to you, something that he's been saying? What would it look like to take the risk and take the next step? I don't pretend to be anywhere near Mary or Joseph, but I can take the next step in what he's asking me to do, and that's what I'm also called to steward. So what does it look like for you to trust, to take the next step, to risk? Just quietly name it. Say it to God. Now connect to the fact that he is close. Close enough to hear, close enough to feel, close enough to lean on. I also feel like the Lord wanted me to say to some of you in the room, don't settle. Don't settle for just ordinary or to continue to struggle, but do the hard thing and keep pressing on. Don't settle. Father, what matters most right now is your voice, your whisper, your nudge towards us, for us. Pray that we would let you lead. I pray as we do that, God, that we could have courage to know that you are the King that is in control, but we would also be filled with love because you are a loving Father who is close. So let us rely on that. We love you. Thank you for your leading and your love. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let's stand together.